I never thought my own mother would slap me across the face at Sunday dinner, but there I was, my cheeks stinging and my heart breaking as she screamed those words that would haunt me for years. It all started when Mom suddenly put down her fork, looked directly at me, and said with complete seriousness, "Billy, I need you to give me your credit card right now. Your sister Amanda needs $250,000 immediately." When I refused and asked what the money was for, her hand flew across my face so hard it echoed through the dining room. "Get out of this house!" she yelled. Amanda just sat there smirking, nodding her agreement like I was some stranger who had overstayed his welcome. Growing up, I always knew I was different from my sister Amanda. While she got to sleep in on weekends, I was up at 6 in the morning delivering newspapers to save money for college. While she received a brand new car for her 16th birthday, I worked 2 jobs at a grocery store and pizza place to buy my own beat-up Honda. My parents called it building character, but I noticed Amanda never seemed to need any character building. Through high school and college, this pattern continued. Amanda would announce some new dream, and Mom and Dad would open their wallets. First, it was art school, which lasted exactly 1 semester, before she decided painting was too restrictive for her creative spirit. Then, it was culinary school, which she quit after 3 months because the chef instructor was too demanding. Each time, my parents would smile and say she was just finding herself while I worked nights and weekends to pay my own tuition at the state university. Now, at 28, I had finally built something solid. My computer science degree had landed me a senior software engineer position at a growing tech startup in downtown Phoenix. I owned my own 2-bedroom condo in Scottsdale, drove a reliable Toyota Camry, and had been saving religiously since my first paycheck. My bank account showed the results of years of careful planning and disciplined spending. Amanda, on the other hand, had blazed through a series of failed business ventures that my parents funded with increasing enthusiasm. There was the boutique clothing store that closed after 8 months because she refused to track inventory or manage finances. Then came the catering company that went under when she spent the equipment money on a luxury vacation to Hawaii. Most recently, she had been talking about some revolutionary new business opportunity that would make her rich beyond imagination, though she remained mysteriously vague about the details. These monthly family dinners had become exercises in endurance for me. I would sit quietly while Mom and Dad praised Amanda's entrepreneurial spirit and creative vision. They would discuss her latest projects with genuine excitement, asking thoughtful questions about her plans, and offering encouragement for whatever obstacles she faced. When they turned to me, the conversation would quickly shift to polite inquiries about my job that clearly bored them, followed by suggestions that I should be more supportive of my sister's ambitious endeavors. The morning after the dinner confrontation, I called my best friend Marcus while driving to work. Marcus had been my roommate in college and understood my family dynamics better than anyone. He listened patiently as I described the bizarre scene at the dinner table, the impossible demand for $250,000, and my mother's shocking reaction to my refusal. "Billy, there's something you need to know," Marcus said, his voice unusually serious. "I saw Amanda 3 nights ago at the Desert Diamond Casino. She was at one of the high-stakes poker tables, and man, she was losing big money. I'm talking thousands of dollars per hand. She was with this older guy in an expensive suit who kept sliding chips her way every time she ran out." My stomach dropped as Marcus continued his account. I tried to walk over and say hello, but when she spotted me, she grabbed her purse and practically ran out of there with the guy. "Billy?" She looked scared when she saw me, like she'd been caught doing something she wasn't supposed to be doing. Suddenly, Amanda's mysterious new business venture and her desperate need for $250,000 began making terrible sense. This wasn't about funding some legitimate opportunity. My sister had gotten herself into serious trouble, and my parents were either completely in the dark or willfully ignoring the warning signs. I couldn't shake what Marcus had told me about seeing Amanda at the casino. Something was seriously wrong, and I needed to understand what I was really dealing with before it destroyed my family. I decided to do some investigating of my own, starting with my cousin Jake, who worked as a loan officer at a major bank in downtown Phoenix. Jake and I met for coffee the next evening at a quiet spot near his office. After I explained the situation, he reluctantly agreed to check if Amanda had applied for any large loans recently. What he found made my blood run cold. "Billy, your sister has been denied for multiple loan applications over the past 6 months," Jake said, sliding a printed summary across the table. "We're talking about applications totaling more than $300,000 from different lenders. Her credit score has tanked, and she already has significant outstanding debt that she's been defaulting on." The numbers on the paper painted a picture of someone spiraling completely out of control. Amanda owed money to credit card companies, had defaulted on a car loan, and had even borrowed against some kind of life insurance policy. According to Jake's research, her debt-to-income ratio made her essentially unbankable through any legitimate financial institution. "There's more," Jake continued, lowering his voice. "I called a buddy who works in commercial lending. Amanda approached his company 2 months ago with some story about needing emergency funding for a family medical crisis. When they asked for documentation, she got angry and stormed out of their office. Armed with this information, I drove to Amanda's apartment complex the next Saturday morning. I had been there only once before, about a year ago, when she had invited the family over to see her new place. It was a upscale complex with a pool and fitness center, the kind of apartment that would cost at least $2,000 per month in rent. When I arrived at her building, I noticed immediately that her name was no longer on the mailbox directory. I climbed the stairs to her third-floor unit and found a notice taped to the door indicating the apartment was available for lease. My heart started racing as I realized my sister had been evicted. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman from the neighboring apartment, opened her door as I stood reading the notice. "Are you looking for the young woman who used to live there?" she asked kindly. "She moved out about 2 weeks ago, poor thing." I introduced myself as Amanda's brother and asked if Mrs. Patterson had seen what happened. The story she told me was deeply troubling. "Your sister seemed like such a nice girl, always dressed so nicely and drove that pretty white BMW, Mrs. Patterson began. "But about a month ago, these men started coming around looking for her. They weren't rough or anything, but they were very serious, wearing suits and asking a lot of questions about her schedule and when she would be home." Mrs. Patterson described how Amanda had become increasingly nervous and jumpy. She would peek through her window before leaving her apartment and had started parking in different spots around the complex instead of using her assigned space. The night she moved out, it was almost midnight. Mrs. Patterson continued. "She had a rental truck and she was crying while she packed her things. She kept looking over her shoulder like she was afraid someone might show up. I offered to help, but she said she had to hurry and couldn't stop to talk." This painted a picture of someone running from serious trouble, not someone launching an exciting new business venture. I thanked Mrs. Patterson for her time and drove straight to the office of Amanda's former business partner, a woman named Sarah, who had worked with her on the failed catering company. I found Sarah at her new job managing a restaurant in downtown Tempe. When I explained who I was and why I wanted to talk, her expression immediately became guarded and uncomfortable. I wondered when someone from Amanda's family would eventually show up. Sarah said, leading me to a quiet corner booth. "Look, I didn't want to cause problems for your family, which is why I never said anything, but your sister nearly destroyed my life." Sarah's story was devastating. She and Amanda had been equal partners in their catering business, each contributing $15,000 to get started. They had shared access to the business bank account and had agreed that any withdrawals over $500 required both signatures. About 4 months into the business, I noticed money disappearing from our account, Sarah explained. Small amounts at first, a few hundred here and there, but then it got bigger. When I confronted Amanda, she always had some explanation about emergency expenses or equipment purchases, but she could never produce receipts. Sarah had trusted Amanda's explanations until she discovered that over $20,000 had been withdrawn without her knowledge or consent. When she demanded an accounting of where the money had gone, Amanda became defensive and accused Sarah of being controlling and suspicious. I finally figured out she was using our business account like her personal piggy bank. Sarah said, her voice filled with old pain and anger. She was gambling with our money, Billy. She would take cash advances from our business credit line and then lose it all at the casinos. When I threatened to report her for theft, she begged me not to press charges because it would destroy her relationship with your parents. Against her better judgment, Sarah had agreed not to involve the police, but the damage was already done. She had been forced to declare bankruptcy when the business collapsed, and her personal credit had been ruined by the debts Amanda had accumulated. Sarah was still rebuilding her financial life 3 years later. I tried to warn your parents indirectly, Sarah said as our conversation ended. I called your mother and suggested they be careful about any business deals with Amanda, but your mom just thought I was being vindictive about our partnership ending badly. Driving home from that meeting, I realized Amanda had been systematically lying to and stealing from people for years. She had used our family's good reputation and people's reluctance to create drama as a shield to protect herself from consequences. The pattern was becoming clear, and I was terrified about what she might be planning next. Armed with concrete evidence of Amanda's gambling addiction and history of theft, I decided it was time to have a serious conversation with my parents. I couldn't stand by and watch them potentially lose everything to fund my sister's destructive behavior. On Thursday evening, I drove to their house in Central Phoenix, carrying copies of all the documentation Jake had provided and notes from my conversations with Mrs. Patterson and Sarah. Mom and Dad were watching the evening news when I arrived. They seemed surprised to see me since our last interaction had ended so badly, but they invited me in and offered me coffee. I sat down across from them in the living room where I had spent countless evenings as a child, and began explaining what I had discovered about Amanda's real situation. Mom, Dad, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I began setting the loan application papers on the coffee table between us. Amanda doesn't need money for any legitimate business venture. She has a serious gambling problem and she's been lying to everyone about what's really going on in her life. I walked them through Jake's findings about the multiple loan denials and Amanda's mounting debts. I described Marcus's account of seeing her at the casino losing thousands of dollars with some unknown man fronting her money. I explained how she had been evicted from her apartment and how Mrs. Patterson had seen suspicious men looking for her. Instead of concern or alarm, Mom's face began flushing with anger as I spoke. "Billy, I cannot believe you would stoop this low," she said, her voice rising. "Are you so jealous of your sister's success that you would make up these horrible lies to try to sabotage her when she needs help? Most." Dad, who was usually the calm mediator in family conflicts, shocked me by slamming his hand on the coffee table. "This is exactly the kind of vindictive behavior we've come to expect from you, Billy. Amanda told us you might try to turn us against her because you've always resented her entrepreneurial spirit." I stared at my father in disbelief. "Dad, these aren't lies. This is documentation from banks and insurance companies. I have witnesses who saw what happened. Amanda has been stealing money and lying to people for years." "Enough," Mom shouted, standing up and pointing toward the door. "I will not sit in my own home and listen to you slander your sister with these fabricated stories. Amanda warned us you might try something like this because you're angry about being asked to help the family." The conversation spiraled completely out of control as my parents refused to even look at the evidence I had brought. They accused me of being petty and selfish, of hiring people to create fake documents, and of trying to destroy Amanda's reputation out of spite. Nothing I said could penetrate their absolute certainty that I was lying. Then, Mom delivered news that made my stomach drop to the floor. Since you're so determined to believe the worst about your sister, you should know that your father and I have already taken steps to help her ourselves, she said defiantly. We remortgaged this house 2 months ago to give Amanda money for her previous business expenses, and last month we took out a second loan against our retirement savings to help her again. Dad nodded grimly. We're not wealthy people, Billy, but we believe in supporting our children when they're trying to build something meaningful. If you were in trouble, we would do the same thing for you. I felt sick as I realized my parents had already put their financial security at risk based on Amanda's lies. Their house, which they had owned for 25 years, was now leveraged to help fund my sister's gambling addiction. Their retirement savings, accumulated over decades of careful planning, had been converted into poker chips and casino debts. How much money have you already given her? I asked, dreading the answer. That's none of your business, Mom snapped. But if you must know, we've provided Amanda with nearly $100,000 over the past 6 months to help her establish her business operations. Before I could respond to this devastating news, my phone started ringing. The caller ID showed Amanda's name, which seemed like an impossible coincidence, given what we were discussing. Against my better judgment, I answered the call and put it on speaker so my parents could hear. Billy, thank God you answered. Amanda's voice came through the phone, sobbing and panicked. I need you to listen very carefully because I don't have much time. These people who I owe money to, they grabbed me outside my apartment and they're holding me somewhere. I don't know where I am, but they said if I don't get them $250,000 by Friday, they're going to hurt me really badly. Mom gasped and reached for the phone, but I held it away from her as Amanda continued her story. They forced me to develop this gambling problem, Billy. They threatened to hurt our family if I didn't keep playing at their casino and losing money. I tried to stop, but they said they would go after Mom and Dad if I didn't keep giving them what they wanted. I know this sounds crazy, but these are dangerous people connected to organized crime. Amanda's voice was shaking with what sounded like genuine terror as she provided an account number where I needed to wire the money. She claimed her captors were allowing her to make this one phone call to arrange payment, and if I didn't transfer the funds by Friday evening, she would disappear forever. Please, Billy, I know I haven't been the best sister, but I'm begging you to save my life. These people aren't bluffing. They showed me what they did to someone else who couldn't pay, and I can't get those images out of my head. The call ended abruptly, leaving the three of us sitting in stunned silence. Mom was crying and reaching for her purse, talking about driving to the bank immediately to wire Amanda whatever money she could access. Dad was pacing the living room, muttering about calling the police and demanding they find his daughter. But something about Amanda's story didn't feel right to me. The timing was too convenient, her explanation too elaborate, and her emotional performance too perfectly calibrated to manipulate my parents' fears. I had seen Amanda lie convincingly many times before, and this felt like her most ambitious deception yet. Mom, Dad, please don't do anything hasty, I said, trying to remain calm while my mind raced. If Amanda has really been kidnapped, we need to call the FBI, not wire money to some random account. Real kidnapping victims don't get to make lengthy phone calls to negotiate payment terms. My parents looked at me with disgust and disappointment that cut deeper than any physical blow could have. Billy, your sister is in mortal danger, and all you can think about is protecting your precious money, Mom said with contempt. Amanda was right about you. When it really matters, you only care about yourself. Dad delivered the ultimatum that would haunt our relationship for years. Son, your mother and I have made our decision. We're going to do whatever it takes to bring Amanda home safely. If you're not willing to contribute the money she needs to save her life, then you're not welcome in this family anymore. We'll find another way to get the money, but we won't forget that you abandoned your sister when she needed you most. I left my parents' house that night knowing that our relationship had been fundamentally broken. They had chosen to believe Amanda's increasingly elaborate lies over evidence and logic, and there seemed to be no way to reach them. As I drove home through the quiet Phoenix streets, I wondered how my family had become so dysfunctional that enabling destructive behavior was considered love, while asking for truth and accountability was treated as betrayal. I couldn't shake the feeling that Amanda's kidnapping story was an elaborate manipulation designed to extract money from our family before anyone could investigate her real situation further. The timing was too perfect, and her account of being forced into gambling addiction by organized crime sounded like something from a movie rather than reality. I decided to take her claims seriously enough to report them to the proper authorities, which would either help rescue her if she was telling the truth, or expose her lies if she was running another con. The next morning, I called the Phoenix Police Department and asked to speak with someone about a possible kidnapping. I was transferred to Detective Maria Rodriguez, who listened carefully as I described Amanda's phone call and her claims about being held against her will by people connected to gambling debts. "Mr. Thompson, I appreciate you calling this in, but I need to share some information with you that might change your perspective on this situation," Detective Rodriguez said, after I finished explaining the circumstances. "We've actually been investigating your sister Amanda for several months now as part of a broader fraud investigation." My heart started pounding as Detective Rodriguez continued. "Amanda hasn't been kidnapped, Billy. She's been voluntarily working with a group of con artists who specialize in defrauding family members and friends through elaborate emergency scenarios. We have her under surveillance, and she's been actively participating in planning these schemes." Detective Rodriguez asked me to come to the police station to discuss what I knew about Amanda's recent activities and to provide any documentation I might have about her financial situation. When I arrived 2 hours later, she showed me evidence that completely shattered my understanding of what my sister had become. "This is surveillance footage from yesterday afternoon, about 4 hours before Amanda made that panicked phone call to you," Detective Rodriguez said, turning her computer monitor toward me. The video showed Amanda sitting in an upscale restaurant in Scottsdale laughing and toasting champagne glasses with the same well-dressed older man Marcus had seen her with at the casino. Her name is actually Amanda Thompson, but she's been using several false identities when approaching potential victims, the detective explained. "The man she's with is Robert Chen, and he's the leader of this fraud ring. They identify people with money and strong family bonds, then create elaborate crisis scenarios designed to extract large sums quickly before anyone can investigate too thoroughly." Detective Rodriguez showed me files on 3 other families who had fallen victim to Amanda's schemes over the past year. In each case, Amanda had befriended someone with wealthy relatives, then manufactured emergencies requiring immediate large cash transfers. She had claimed to be dying of cancer while asking one family for experimental treatment money. She had pretended to be trapped in a foreign country needing bail money from another family. The kidnapping story was just her latest creative scenario. "What makes your sister particularly effective is that she uses real emotional knowledge about her targets," Detective Rodriguez continued. "She knows exactly which buttons to push because she has genuine relationships with the people she's defrauding. Her own family represents her biggest potential payday because she understands your parents' psychology better than anyone." The detective explained that Amanda had been living in a luxury apartment in Scottsdale, under a false name funded by money she had stolen from previous victims. The eviction from her old apartment had been staged to create evidence supporting her story about being in financial trouble. Even Mrs. Patterson's account of seeing suspicious men had been orchestrated with members of the fraud ring posing as creditors to establish Amanda's cover story. We've been building a case against this entire organization for months, Detective Rodriguez said. Your sister's phone call yesterday was recorded because we have warrants to monitor the phones of everyone involved in this ring. Amanda knew exactly where she was when she called you, and she was reading from a script that Robert Chen had prepared. I felt physically sick as the full scope of Amanda's betrayal became clear. She hadn't just been lying to our family about gambling debts or business ventures. She had been systematically manipulating people's emotions and exploiting their love for her as part of an organized criminal enterprise. Every tear she had shed, every desperate plea for help, had been carefully calculated to maximize the psychological pressure on her targets. Detective Rodriguez, my parents are planning to wire money to save Amanda's life, I said urgently. They've already mortgaged their house and used their retirement savings based on her previous lies. If they send more money now, they could lose everything they own. I'm afraid your parents may have already acted on Amanda's demands, the detective replied grimly. We've been monitoring the account number Amanda provided, and it received a wire transfer of $50,000 early this morning. The money was immediately moved through several offshore accounts, which is the standard process this fraud ring uses to make funds untraceable. My worst fears were confirmed when Detective Rodriguez showed me the wire transfer records. My parents had gotten up early and gone to their bank the moment it opened, liquidating what remained of their savings and retirement accounts to send money to Amanda's criminal associates. They had also applied for a home equity loan that would be processed within 48 hours, giving them access to additional funds they planned to send. Is there any way to stop them from sending more money? I asked desperately. Not unless they voluntarily choose to stop, Detective Rodriguez said. We can't prevent people from wiring their own money even if we know they're being defrauded. The best we can do is provide them with evidence and hope they make rational decisions. I tried calling my parents to warn them about what I had learned, but they refused to answer their phones. When I drove to their house, they wouldn't come to the door, though I could see them peering through the curtains. I left multiple voicemails explaining that Amanda was involved with criminals and that the police were investigating her, but they apparently interpreted these messages as more evidence that I was trying to sabotage my sister. By the end of the week, Detective Rodriguez informed me that my parents had successfully obtained their home equity loan and had wired an additional $200,000 to accounts controlled by Amanda's criminal organization. Combined with their previous transfers, they had now sent nearly $250,000 to people who had been lying to them from the beginning. Your parents have been in contact with Amanda several times since the initial kidnapping call, Detective Rodriguez told me during a follow-up meeting. She's been providing them with updates about her situation and expressing gratitude for their help. They believe they're participating in ongoing ransom negotiations, but they're actually just being strung along until the criminals have extracted everything possible. The detective showed me additional surveillance footage of Amanda celebrating at expensive restaurants and shopping at high-end stores, clearly enjoying the money she had stolen from our family. In one particularly painful video, Amanda was shown laughing while describing to Robert Chen how easy it had been to manipulate our parents' emotions. We're planning to arrest Amanda and the other members of this fraud ring within the next few weeks, Detective Rodriguez said. When that happens, your parents will finally see evidence that their daughter has been lying to them. Unfortunately, by then, they may have lost their house and most of their retirement savings. I realized that my parents had chosen to believe Amanda's lies not just over my warnings, but over basic logic and common sense. They were so invested in seeing her as a victim rather than a predator that they couldn't process any information that contradicted their narrative. Amanda had exploited their parental love and turned it into a weapon against their own financial security. Watching my parents destroy their financial future while refusing to acknowledge reality was agonizing, but I decided to make one last attempt to save them from complete ruin. If Amanda was running an organized fraud scheme, I needed to find a way to get her to admit the truth on record, creating evidence so compelling that even my parents couldn't dismiss it. I called Amanda's number expecting it to go straight to voicemail, but she answered on the second ring. Her voice sounded cheerful and relaxed, completely different from the terrified tone she had used during her supposed kidnapping call. "Billy, I'm so glad you called," she said warmly. "I wanted to thank you for helping convince Mom and Dad to send that money so quickly. You really came through for the family when it mattered most." I was confused by her gratitude since I hadn't encouraged our parents to send any money. "Amanda, where are you right now? Are you safe?" "Oh, I'm perfectly fine," she laughed. "Those people released me as soon as they got the payment. I'm staying at a nice hotel while I figure out my next steps. Mom and Dad are such angels for helping me out of that terrible situation." Her casual tone made it clear she had no idea I had been investigating her activities or talking to the police. I decided to take advantage of her false sense of security by proposing a face-to-face meeting where I could try to record her admitting the truth. "Amanda, I feel terrible about how I reacted when Mom first asked me to help," I said, trying to sound apologetic. "I've been thinking about it, and I realize I should have been more supportive. I'd like to meet you in person to apologize and to discuss how I can contribute to helping you get back on your feet." Amanda agreed enthusiastically to meet me the next afternoon at a coffee shop in Central Phoenix. She seemed excited about the prospect of accessing my savings account and suggested we could discuss business opportunities where I might invest in her future ventures. I spent that evening figuring out how to activate the voice recording function on my smartphone, hoping to capture evidence that might finally convince my parents they were being deceived. The coffee shop was busy when I arrived, which provided good cover for our conversation. Amanda showed up 15 minutes late, looking healthy and well-rested, despite supposedly having been kidnapped and traumatized just days earlier. She was wearing expensive clothes and jewelry that I had never seen before, clearly purchased with money stolen from our family. "Billy, you look so stressed," she said, giving me a hug as if we were the closest siblings in the world. "I know this whole situation has been difficult for everyone, but I'm just grateful it worked out okay in the end." I started by asking about her experience with the supposed kidnappers, hoping she would maintain her cover story. Instead, Amanda surprised me by dropping the pretense almost immediately. "Oh, that whole kidnapping thing was just something I had to tell Mom and Dad to get them to act quickly," she said casually, stirring sugar into her coffee. "You know how they are. They need to feel like they're rescuing me, or they get all analytical and start asking too many questions about details." I couldn't believe she was admitting her deception so openly. "Amanda, are you saying you were never actually kidnapped?" She laughed, as if I had asked whether the sky was blue. "Of course I wasn't kidnapped, Billy. That was just a story I used because I needed money fast, and I knew Mom and Dad would respond to that kind of emergency scenario. I've gotten pretty good at figuring out which approach works best with different people." Amanda went on to explain her methods with disturbing pride and enthusiasm. She described how she had spent months studying psychology and manipulation techniques, learning to identify people's emotional vulnerabilities and exploit them for financial gain. She talked about our parents as if they were particularly easy targets because of their strong desire to see themselves as loving and supportive. "The key with Mom and Dad is making them feel important and needed," she explained, completely oblivious to how horrifying her words sounded. "They've always been frustrated by how independent you are, Billy. You never give them opportunities to feel like good parents because you solve all your own problems. But I let them rescue me over and over again, and it makes them feel valuable." I asked Amanda about her previous business ventures and whether any of them had been legitimate. She rolled her eyes and described them as practice runs for more sophisticated schemes. "That catering company with Sarah was just me, learning how to manipulate a business partner," Amanda said dismissively. I took her money to fund my real education, which was learning how to read people and control their emotions. Sarah was so naive and trusting that it was almost too easy. Amanda revealed that she had been working with Robert Chen's fraud organization for over 2 years, starting with small schemes targeting acquaintances and gradually working up to larger operations involving family members. She described our parents' mortgage and retirement funds as her biggest score yet, but not her final goal. The beauty of working with family is that they'll keep giving you money even after they can't afford it, she said with chilling matter-of-factness. Mom and Dad will take out more loans, sell their possessions, and borrow from friends if necessary. They can't admit they've been fooled because it would mean accepting that their daughter is not who they thought she was. I felt like I was talking to a complete stranger who happened to share my DNA. The sister I had grown up with, despite all her flaws and selfishness, had never seemed capable of such calculated cruelty. This person, sitting across from me, was describing our parents' love as a resource to be mined until they had nothing left. Amanda, don't you care at all about what this is doing to Mom and Dad? I asked, genuinely trying to understand her mindset. They've put their house at risk and destroyed their retirement plans because they believe you're in danger. Her response revealed the depth of her psychological transformation. Billy, you've always been jealous because they love me more than they love you, she said with a cold smile. But you never understood why that is. It's not because I'm more talented or more deserving. It's because I make them feel needed while you make them feel useless. Amanda explained her twisted philosophy about family relationships, arguing that people who demand independence and refuse help are actually being cruel to those who want to provide support. According to her logic, she was doing our parents a favor by giving them opportunities to feel important and generous. You could have been part of this, Billy, she continued. Robert has taught me that every family has someone who can be turned into a resource if you approach them correctly. Your problem is that you think honesty is more important than making people happy. The conversation took an even darker turn when Amanda threatened me directly. If you try to interfere with my relationship with Mom and Dad by sharing what we've talked about today, I'll tell them that you attacked me at this meeting, she said calmly. I'll show up at their house with bruises and tears, claiming that you tried to force me to sign papers, giving you control of my finances. Who do you think they'll believe? I realized that Amanda had become someone genuinely dangerous, not just to our parents' financial security, but potentially to anyone who threatened her schemes. She had learned to weaponize people's emotions with the skill of a professional con artist, and she had no moral boundaries that would prevent her from destroying lives to get what she wanted. The recording on my phone captured every word of Amanda's confession, providing clear evidence of her fraud and manipulation. However, when I got home and tried to call my parents to play them the recording, I discovered they had already acted on Amanda's latest request for money. Detective Rodriguez called me that evening with devastating news. Billy, your parents wired another $75,000 this afternoon to an account controlled by the fraud ring, she said. They took out a personal loan using their car as collateral and cleaned out a joint savings account they had with your mother's sister. My parents had now transferred over $300,000 to criminals based on Amanda's lies. They had leveraged everything they owned and borrowed against assets that belonged to other family members. Even if the police successfully arrested Amanda and her criminal associates, the chances of recovering any meaningful amount of money were virtually zero. There's something else you need to know, Detective Rodriguez continued. We've been monitoring Amanda's communications, and she's planning to disappear soon. Her criminal organization typically extracts as much money as possible from victims and then vanishes before anyone can build a legal case against them. I realized that Amanda's coffee shop confession had been possible only because she was confident she would be gone before I could use the information against her. She had been testing whether I might become a problem that needed to be handled more aggressively. My parents would soon lose contact with their daughter entirely, but not before she had taken everything they had managed to accumulate over a lifetime of hard work. The weeks following Amanda's confession were among the most difficult of my life. I watched my parents struggle with mounting financial pressure while continuing to defend Amanda's character to anyone who would listen. They had told extended family members, neighbors, and longtime friends that I had abandoned the family during a crisis, painting me as selfish and heartless for refusing to help rescue my kidnapped sister. The social consequences of their narrative were devastating for me personally. My Uncle Tom, who had been like a second father during my childhood, stopped returning my phone calls after my parents told him I had refused to help save Amanda's life. My grandmother, who was 86 years old and had always been proud of my accomplishments, sent me a letter expressing disappointment that I had become so cold and money-focused. Cousins who had been close friends growing up began treating me like a stranger at family gatherings when they bothered to invite me at all. My parents' financial situation deteriorated rapidly as loan payments came due, and their income proved insufficient to cover their new obligations. They fell behind on their mortgage payments and received foreclosure warnings that they tried to hide from neighbors and family. The stress of their financial crisis began affecting their health, with Mom developing anxiety-related insomnia and Dad experiencing chest pains that required emergency room visits. 6 months after Amanda had supposedly been rescued from kidnappers, Detective Rodriguez called with an update that provided the first glimmer of hope in this entire nightmare. Billy. I wanted to let you know that we finally made arrests in this fraud case, she said. Amanda and 4 other members of the criminal organization were taken into custody in Las Vegas as part of a coordinated operation involving multiple law enforcement agencies. Detective Rodriguez explained that Amanda had been arrested at a luxury resort where she had been living under a false identity using money stolen from my parents and other victims. When police searched her hotel room, they found evidence linking her to fraud schemes in 6 different states involving total losses exceeding $2 million. Your sister won't be getting out of this one. Billy, the detective assured me. We have recorded phone calls, financial records, surveillance footage, and testimony from multiple victims. She's looking at federal fraud charges that could result in 8 to 10 years in prison. More importantly, for my family's situation, Detective Rodriguez explained that federal prosecutors were pursuing asset forfeiture to recover money for victims. Amanda had used stolen funds to purchase expensive jewelry, art, and other luxury items that could be liquidated to provide partial restitution. I want you to understand that victims typically recover only a small percentage of their losses in these cases, Detective Rodriguez warned. But there may be some money available, and your parents will be eligible to apply for compensation through the Victim Restitution Program. The detective also mentioned that my recorded conversation with Amanda would be crucial evidence in the prosecution's case. Her detailed confession to manipulating our family and working with organized criminals would help establish a pattern of deliberate fraud rather than simple financial mismanagement. However, the legal process would take years to complete, and my parents were facing foreclosure on their house within the next few months. Even if they eventually recovered some money through victim restitution, it would be too late to save their home or rebuild their retirement savings. I realized that my parents would need immediate help to survive financially, while the legal system slowly worked toward justice. At the same time, I understood that simply giving them money would enable the same dysfunction that had allowed Amanda to manipulate them so effectively. They needed to face real consequences for their choices before they could learn and grow from this experience. After considerable thought, I developed a plan that would provide my parents with anonymous assistance while allowing them to experience accountability for their decisions. I began paying their utility bills directly to the companies, ensuring they had electricity, water, and heat without knowing where the payments were coming from. I arranged for grocery deliveries to their house twice a week, prepaid, and scheduled to arrive when they would be home. I also contacted their mortgage company and worked out a payment plan that would prevent foreclosure while giving my parents time to adjust their budget. I made the payments anonymously through a lawyer, creating a paper trail that protected my parents' home without revealing my involvement. These interventions kept my parents from becoming homeless or losing basic services, but they still had to deal with the stress and uncertainty of their financial crisis. They were forced to sell their car and buy an older, less reliable vehicle. They had to give up cable television, restaurant meals, and other conveniences they had taken for granted. They learned what it felt like to worry about money and to make difficult choices about spending priorities. During this period, I also began documenting everything I knew about Amanda's crimes and their impact on our family. I wrote detailed accounts of her history of manipulation, her confession to fraud, and the progression of lies she had used to extract money from our parents. I contacted other victims of her schemes and began building a comprehensive record of her criminal activities. My goal was to create a resource that would help my parents eventually understand how they had been manipulated and what warning signs they had missed. I also wanted to help other families avoid falling victim to similar schemes by sharing what I had learned about the psychology of fraud and emotional manipulation. I reached out to Sarah, Amanda's former business partner, and helped her connect with Detective Rodriguez to provide testimony about Amanda's early criminal behavior. Sarah's story about the theft from their catering company business account provided important evidence about Amanda's long-term pattern of exploiting trust and manipulating people's desire to avoid conflict. Most importantly, I began the difficult process of rebuilding my own life while maintaining appropriate boundaries with my family. I started therapy to work through the trauma of being rejected and vilified by people I loved for trying to protect them from harm. I learned strategies for managing relationships with family members who had proven they would choose comfortable lies over difficult truths. I also focused on my career and personal relationships, strengthening connections with people who valued honesty and integrity. I had been so focused on trying to rescue my family that I had neglected friendships and professional opportunities. I began investing energy in relationships that were based on mutual respect rather than manipulation and obligation. The waiting period before Amanda's trial was emotionally challenging, but it also provided time for reflection and healing. I came to understand that my parents' rejection of me said more about their psychological limitations than about my character or behavior. I learned that protecting myself from toxic family dynamics wasn't selfish but necessary for my own mental health and growth. 5 years passed between the night I walked out of that devastating family dinner and the phone call that would finally bring resolution to our family's crisis. During those years, I had built a successful tech company with my college girlfriend Rachel, who became my wife in a small ceremony attended by friends and chosen family. We had created a life based on honesty, mutual support, and shared values that felt completely different from the dysfunction I had grown up with. My parents had survived their financial crisis, but just barely. They had lost their family home to foreclosure despite my anonymous assistance, and had moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a less expensive neighborhood. Dad had been forced to return to work part-time at age 68, taking a job at a hardware store to help cover their basic expenses. Mom had started cleaning houses for neighbors' work that was physically demanding, but provided enough income to supplement Dad's wages. The stress of their financial struggles had taken a toll on their health and their relationship with each other. They had been forced to confront the reality that their retirement dreams were gone and that they would probably need to work for the rest of their lives. However, this period of hardship had also begun teaching them lessons about distinguishing between wants and needs, and about the importance of financial planning and skeptical thinking. I had maintained minimal contact with my parents during these 5 years, sending birthday cards and holiday greetings, but avoiding deeper involvement in their lives. This wasn't out of anger or resentment, but from a recognition that our relationships needed clear boundaries to prevent further manipulation and dysfunction. I continued providing anonymous help with their most basic needs, but I didn't reveal my involvement or expect gratitude for my assistance. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in October, while Rachel and I were having coffee and planning our workday. My phone showed 35 missed calls from Mom, which immediately triggered anxiety since my parents typically called only on holidays or in emergencies. When I finally answered, Mom was crying so hard I could barely understand what she was saying. "Billy, I need to see you," she managed between sobs. "Something has happened with Amanda and your father, and I have been completely wrong about everything. We need to apologize to you, and we need to explain what we've learned." That afternoon, I met my parents at a coffee shop near their apartment neutral territory that felt safer for everyone involved. They looked older and more fragile than I remembered, worn down by years of stress and hard work. But there was something different in their eyes, a clarity and humility that I had never seen before. "Amanda was sentenced yesterday," Dad began quietly. 8 years in federal prison for fraud and conspiracy. The judge read a statement describing all the families she had destroyed and all the money she had stolen. "Billy, she took almost $400,000 from us, and we were just one of 12 families she had targeted." Mom handed me a folder containing newspaper articles about Amanda's trial and conviction. The headlines told a story I had lived through, but my parents were only now beginning to understand. "Local woman sentenced for multi-state fraud scheme," and "criminal organization defrauded families of over $2 million. The prosecutor played a recording during the trial. Mom continued, her voice shaking. "It was Amanda talking to someone about how easy it was to manipulate us, how she had been planning this for years, and how she never felt any guilt about taking our money. I recognized the description of my coffee shop conversation with Amanda, the recording that had captured her detailed confession to fraud and manipulation. Hearing those words played in a courtroom with lawyers and judges and reporters present had finally forced my parents to confront the reality of who their daughter had become. "Billy, we threw away our relationship with our good son to protect our criminal daughter," Dad said, tears streaming down his face. "We called you selfish and heartless when you were the only person trying to save us from losing everything. We chose to believe lies instead of evidence, and we hurt you in ways we can never fully repair." Mom reached across the table and took my hand. "We know now that someone has been helping us survive these past 5 years," she said softly. "The utility payments, the grocery deliveries, the mysterious assistance with our mortgage before we lost the house. We never figured out who was doing it, but we suspected it might be you." I nodded, acknowledging my involvement without providing details. "I couldn't watch you become homeless or go hungry, even though you had rejected me," I said simply. "I needed you to face consequences for your choices, but I didn't want you to suffer more than necessary." The conversation continued for 3 hours, as my parents shared everything they had learned about Amanda's criminal activities and their own role in enabling her destructive behavior. They had attended counseling sessions for fraud victims where they learned about the psychological techniques used by con artists to exploit family relationships and emotional vulnerabilities. "We understand now that Amanda targeted us because she knew we wanted to feel important and needed," Mom explained. "She gave us constant opportunities to rescue her, which made us feel like good parents, even though we were actually enabling terrible behavior." Dad described how they had come to realize that my independence and success, which they had interpreted as rejection of their help, was actually a sign of healthy development and strong character. "You never needed us to rescue you because you had learned to solve problems and take responsibility for your life," he said. "That should have made us proud, not resentful." My parents didn't ask for money or expect me to solve their ongoing financial problems. They acknowledged that they had made choices that led to consequences they would live with for the rest of their lives. But they wanted to rebuild our relationship based on honesty, respect, and realistic expectations rather than manipulation and fantasy. "Oh, we can't change what we've done," Billy, Mom said, as our conversation drew to a close. "But we want to spend whatever time we have left trying to be the kind of parents you deserve to have. We want to learn from our mistakes and become people you can trust and respect." I agreed to begin rebuilding our relationship gradually with clear boundaries and honest communication. I offered to help them find better jobs and more affordable housing, but only if they committed to transparency about their finances and decision-making. I also insisted that they continue counseling to work through the psychological issues that had made them vulnerable to Amanda's manipulation. Over the following months, my parents proved their commitment to change through consistent actions rather than just words. They found better-paying jobs, moved to a nicer apartment, and began rebuilding their savings through careful budgeting and financial planning. They started therapy to understand their parenting mistakes and learn to appreciate my stability instead of resenting it. We established a new tradition of monthly family dinners, where Rachel and I cooked for my parents, and we shared updates about our lives and goals. These meals felt completely different from the dysfunctional gatherings of the past, characterized by honest communication, mutual respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. 6 months after Amanda's sentencing, we received notice that some money would be available through victim restitution, as prosecutors liquidated assets purchased with stolen funds. My parents were eligible to recover about 15% of what they had lost, enough to provide a small cushion for emergencies, but not enough to restore their retirement security. "We're grateful for anything we can recover," Dad told me when we received the restitution paperwork. "But we've learned that our happiness doesn't depend on having lots of money or living in a big house. We're happier now in our small apartment than we were when we were lying to ourselves about Amanda." The most healing moment in our reconciliation came when my parents attended Rachel's and my 5th wedding anniversary celebration. They had missed our original wedding because they were estranged from me at the time, but they were able to be present for our anniversary renewal of vows. Seeing them celebrate our relationship and express genuine pride in the life we had built together felt like a gift I had never expected to receive. Amanda wrote letters from prison that none of us chose to read. According to Detective Rodriguez, these letters typically contained manipulative attempts to portray herself as a victim of circumstances and to generate sympathy for early release. We decided that maintaining no contact was the healthiest choice for everyone involved. The experience taught me that sometimes the greatest act of love is allowing people to face the consequences of their choices, because only through accountability can genuine healing and transformation occur. Enabling destructive behavior, even with good intentions, ultimately hurts everyone involved and prevents the growth that comes from learning hard lessons. My parents learned that supporting your children doesn't mean believing everything they tell you or funding every request they make. Real love requires discernment, boundaries, and sometimes the courage to say no when someone you care about is engaging in self-destructive behavior. Our family is smaller now, but it's healthier and more honest than it has ever been. We've learned to value integrity over harmony, truth over comfort, and accountability over enablement. The painful journey through Amanda's betrayal and its aftermath ultimately brought us closer together by teaching us what authentic family relationships should look like. Rachel and I now have 2 young children who are growing up in a family environment characterized by honesty, responsibility, and unconditional love that doesn't excuse harmful behavior. My parents are devoted grandparents who have learned from their mistakes and are committed to supporting healthy development rather than enabling dysfunction. The story of our family's crisis and eventual healing has become something I share with other people who are dealing with similar situations involving fraud manipulation and family dysfunction. The lessons we learned about recognizing emotional manipulation and maintaining appropriate boundaries have helped other families avoid the mistakes we made and recover more quickly from betrayals. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and protecting them from the consequences of their actions? How do you balance family loyalty with personal boundaries when someone you care about is engaging in destructive behavior? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with others who might benefit from hearing about our journey. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges and building healthier relationships. Thank you for listening to our story, and I hope it provides encouragement for anyone who is struggling with similar difficult family dynamics. Remember that choosing truth over comfort is always the path toward genuine healing and growth.